Hey friends, welcome back. Today we are diving into a question that comes up every single Passover season. And the question is, does baking soda count as leaven? I could give you a yes or no answer, but I want to walk through what leaven actually is, how it works, and why that even matters. So today we're getting into one of the most common questions that comes up every single year around Passover, and it's this. Does baking soda or baking powder count as leaven? Because you hear remove all leaven from your home. And then you look at your pantry and you think, okay, but what counts? And honestly, the confusion does make sense. Why do people get confused? Well, in modern baking, we call things like baking soda and baking powder leavening agents. So naturally, people assume if it makes things rise, it must be leaven. But the Bible isn't using modern baking language, and that's where the misunderstanding starts. What the Bible actually means by leaven? Well, if we go back to the original command in Exodus, we're told to remove leaven from our homes. But the Hebrew word used here, seor, doesn't mean anything that causes rising. It specifically refers to fermented dough, something that is living, active, and spreading. That's a really important distinction because yeast and sourdough starters work through fermentation. They feed, they grow, they multiply. And over time, they'll spread through the whole batch. That's why Scripture uses leaven as a metaphor, because it permeates everything. But baking soda and baking powder, they don't do that. They work through a chemical reaction. You mix them with liquid and then apply heat and they produce gas very quickly. There's no growth, there's no organism, there's no spreading. So technically speaking, no, baking soda and baking powder are not leaven. They don't fit the biblical definition of leaven because they are not fermented. They are not alive. They do not spread through a process over time. But here's where it gets a little nuanced. Because baking soda is not usually used with flour. And if that flour is part of a leavened product, then the final result still matters. So it's not just about the ingredient, it's about what you're making with it. This is also why you'll see different practices. Some people will allow baking soda and baking powder as long as it's not mixed with fermented grains. Others choose to remove all modern leavening entirely, not because the Bible requires it, but because they want simplicity, clarity, and honestly, no gray areas. So let's bring this back to the purpose. This is where I want to gently shift the focus because the question, does baking soda or baking powder count, is really a doorway into something deeper. Because the command to remove leaven was never only about the ingredients. It was about remembrance. It was about identity, and it was about awareness. The Israelites removed leaven because they left Egypt in haste. There was no time to let things rise. There was no time to linger. So maybe the question isn't just, does this ingredient qualify? Maybe it's, what is the purpose of this practice? Because once you understand that, you stop trying to just follow the rules and you start engaging with what the rules actually mean. What are they actually there for? So leaven in Scripture represents something that spreads, influences, and transforms over time. Paul in the New Testament even says a little leaven leavens the whole lump. And any bakers out there, they'll know what I'm talking about. It takes a very little bit of yeast to leaven a whole 2-pound loaf of bread. But that's how influence works, isn't it? So here's the grounded takeaway. Baking soda and baking powder are not leaven in the biblical sense. They do not ferment. They do not spread. But this practice isn't just about technical definitions. It's about stepping into a rhythm that asks, what is shaping me quietly over time? And when you approach it that way, this stops being about, am I doing this right? And becomes, am I paying attention? This is about intentional living. It's about awareness. It's about aligning with something deeper than habit. And as always, coming back to the design that was there from the very beginning. I hope you've enjoyed this. Until next time, stay healthy in heart.